All right, so now we're going to cover patient-provider communication. So let's start with stereotypes. What do you think when you hear patient-provider communication? A lot of people think doctors are mean, patients are dumb, doctors are only in it for the money, patients just read stuff off WebMD and bring it in, doctors just prescribe pills and send you off. They don't do anything else. But what other motivators might be at play? What barriers? So we're going to start with the interaction and we're going to talk about patient-provider communication in depth. So the interaction, provider interruption. So providers tend to interrupt in the first 16 to 20 seconds. I know seconds isn't on the slide, but it is seconds, I promise you. So they tend to interrupt their patients. You come in to tell them, hey, here's what I have going on, and the provider interrupts you. Medical residents, about a third don't even ask the patient anything. Once interrupted, only about 2% of patients complete their agenda. So if a medical resident is working with you, they may not ask you anything. 33% aren't going to ask you anything. And if you get somebody in the 66% that does interrupt you, only about 2% of you are going to complete your agenda. Well, as I was saying, this is what I'm experiencing and this is why I'm here today. More with the interaction, the consequences of provider dominance. So patients, when patients don't explain their concerns, even in this biomedical model, it's a problem. Most tests and diagnoses are based on patient information. So if I don't explain my concerns about what's going on. So for example, I had blood clots, and I use this as a good example because it's something that I had to talk to doctors about. I had a ton of doctors. And I told them, hey, this is what's going on with my leg. I don't know what could have caused it. But had they not asked me a question, I also had pain in my ribs. And they found out that the blood clot in my leg actually threw 2 clots into my lung, right? So if I don't explain that, then they don't test for it. Then I can't be diagnosed properly. The first problem is not necessarily the major health issue. It's that the psychosocial element is left out, right? So it's not that I didn't tell you everything for my health. It's that how I'm feeling about it, social expectations about it, those aren't included. All right, so with the biomedical model, like I said, we focus on the pathophysiology of disease, science-based inquiry, focuses disease only. We go through these quite a few times, so I am just going to glance over them now because this is the third time I'm bringing it up. The biopsychosocial model combines our biology, our psychology, our social expectations, so we focus on the illness experience and the disease. So the problematic healthcare communication, interruptions prevent information exchange. Because you've interrupted me, I don't feel like I can continue talking. I don't feel like I can say anything new or add anything to the conversation. So I don't tell you anything. The biomedical approach favors provider knowledge and status, however. There is an inherent power differential, so the doctors know way more than we do. There's unequal access to information. The doctors know way more than we do. They have access to all these medical journals and they can understand what it says. We don't have that. Typically, providers don't want to confuse their patients with medical information, so they try to dumb it down, but their knowledge and their status really helps diagnose the disease. They also don't want to burden them with making big decisions. Making a big healthcare decision can be taxing. It can be very taxing. So if we don't want to burden people with our big decisions, we dumb it down so it doesn't seem like it's such a big decision. The biopsychosocial approach favors patient input and a fuller understanding of the illness experience. So why isn't the patient interview more equal? Well, feeling that the patient won't speak up or are talking too much about irrelevant things. That's why doctors will interrupt, because the patient isn't speaking up and what they're talking about doesn't really matter. The rules of politeness and professionalism, the higher status person is often the one that is deferred to, so we just let them speak. Institutional routines and rules, so a rushed schedule. We have back to back meetings today. I will talk with this patient for 5 minutes and then I will move on with my day. Providers may also be in ethical binds when getting too personal, right? So, what can they and can't they share with insurance or whatever it is? All right, so patient-provider communication. How do we understand the process and outcomes of the patient-provider interaction? So remember that transaction is our basic unit of analysis in health communication. The quality of communication relies on assessment of both actors, both the provider and the patient. So from our book, communicators exert mutual influence on each other, such that the approach one participant takes suggests how the others should respond, right? You tell me I have cancer, that's going to tell me how I should respond to the situation, right? Because we're exerting mutual influence. Communication theory to better understand patient-provider communication, right? So we could use theory. For today, we're going to talk about communication accommodation theory. So this is how interactants influence each other throughout the interaction. So let's talk about CAT, or communication accommodation theory. The central concept is speakers from different social groups adjust and modify verbal and nonverbal communication in response to the other in an interaction. So accommodation is how the interactants monitor and adjust their behavior in an interaction. They can move forward or move toward, converge the other communication style, or move away, diverge the other's communication style. So they can start to communicate similar to the other person, or they can communicate dissimilar from the other person. Are they accommodating? Okay. It does not necessarily mean that they are being accommodating, right? So doctors might diverge and continue to use large medical words that you don't understand. So you ask, like, what does that mean? And they don't tell you. They don't fully explain it. They don't use layperson's communication. So they're not being accommodating to you. Power and identity are two key concepts for communication accommodation theory. So people diverge, separate, or converge, come together, based on trying to accentuate or diminish communication, diminish power and identity, right? Patients and providers speak different languages, have very different perceptions of health and medicine, right? I know nothing about the medical field. I'm not a medical doctor. I am a PhD. So when talking to a provider, a physician, I need clarification. And maybe their thing is they want to keep the power. They want to keep the differences in the power and identity of each person. Okay? Convergent, how individuals adapt in terms of linguistics, utterance length, pauses, speech rate, and dress. So it can be upward or downward. They can converge. Patients can converge upward. Physicians might converge downward. It's full, partial, or hyper crossovers beyond others' behaviors, right? So we're taking on another person's behavior either fully, partially, or kind of this little crossover. Sorry, my dog is moving. And then it can be intended or unintended. Come here, King. Right? We can mean to converge, but we might not mean to converge. Convergence is based on objective communication behavior, so how they actually talk, and perceived communication behavior, so how you think they talk. These are beliefs about convergence and bias from stereotypes. So we have under accommodation with convergence, believing you are converging but in reality, we don't go far enough. Results in the converger thinking that they should have better communication outcomes, right? I'm accommodating, I'm doing great, but we're not going far enough. And it confuses us because we think that we should have better outcomes. Then we have over-accommodation, so overdoing attempted convergence, going above and beyond. Usually this is perceived as impolite and not genuine, but think about how this looks like in a medical context. Like, what does it look like when your doctor over-accommodates? I feel like we're being talked down to. Divergence. This is how individuals try to accentuate their differences. So, example of a kid or a doctor trying to demonstrate that they're different based on their power and identity, right? Doctor has that power. They are the whole reason we were at the hospital that day. We want them to check us out and fix our problems, right? So we accentuate, or they try to accentuate those differences. It occurs because of greater group identity elsewhere than the interactic. So group permeability, their status within the hospital, it's a greater group identity elsewhere than within the interactant. Divergence can be complementary and deconstructive. So complementary is unconsciously taking the other role in a power differential. If providers act like parents, patients are encouraged to take the complementary child role and vice versa, and patients tend to be annoyed by this patronizing behavior. All right, so with communication accommodation theory, remember it's intentional and unintentional. So we might want to try to show difference or similarity, and it's not always bad. A patient may respond better, may reorient an overly conversational visit, right? But we also unconsciously adapt. So patient nonverbals might encourage lopsided communication and provider dominance. So posture, being timid, being quiet, being shy. That might make the conversation one-sided. And the provider use of jargon and directive language stops the patient from speaking up and sharing because they don't understand, they don't want to share. So the main takeaways from CAT, communication accommodation theory, it's problematic communication patterns that are caused by both parties. Providers put patients in submissive roles, and patients can put providers in domineering roles. So it's not just one causing the issues. Status and power differentials can often be unproductive, but can be useful. And the goal of the interaction is to encourage information exchange and decision making. So this is your experience. Obviously, you don't have to turn anything in, but think about the positive and negative healthcare experience that you've had. If it was negative, how much of that was due to your provider diverging and exerting their power? If it was positive, how much of that was your provider meeting your communication style and building rapport? All right, so that is the end of patient-provider communication. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I will see you in the next video. All right, bye.